Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming together to practice here at Great Vow, and those of you joining us online. We just finished a Beginner's Mind retreat, a weekend retreat at Great Vow. And in a retreat like this, we take time to explain things and guide people into retreat practice in the Zen form, or at least the way that we practice here. Explain things like posture, the method of meditation, how to do the mindful eating that we call oryoki as part of our practice. So for many people, it was their first retreat or first retreat in a while. Definitely a stretch. People were very wholehearted and genuine, and it was just a very lovely retreat. So because of this retreat, we're going to interrupt our regularly scheduled Dharma talk for a session that I'd like to call Ask the Buddhist. So I'll be your host, Bansho. In this episode, I'll take up some frequently asked questions about Buddhism, about Zen, and maybe we'll have a chance to take some questions too. So if anything comes up, we'll have time for that. So let's look at our first question that we got in our question box. What do Buddhists believe? We didn't really talk about this so much in the retreat, so I'll talk about it a little bit now. What do Buddhists believe? Well, one thing that can make it kind of confusing is that there's not one book. Unlike some other spiritual traditions where there's a one book or one sort of single thing, single reference point. Buddhism doesn't really have that. There's many writings, many scriptures, things that we refer to. And belief itself, what do Buddhists believe, is a little bit off the mark from the way that we orient in a lot of spiritual traditions. So in this tradition, it isn't so much about coming to here and figuring out, do I believe this or not? What do I have to believe in order to belong here? It's not like that. What Buddhists emphasize is inquiry into the experience of living a human life. And living a human life is not separate from the expression of reality. It's not like we have human beings and human lives and then there's like reality out there. We're completely embedded in the universe. But we're interested in what it is to be human. There are some sort of central thrusts within Buddhism that we inquire into. Some main truths that we can explore for ourselves. So one of them is that human beings have stressful lives, problems, and that that experience is universal to all human beings. Will experience problems. Anybody here not experience problems? Okay. Everyone here has problems, we have stress. And that the teaching in Buddhism to explore is that this stress comes from the way that we relate to our experience. That the way that we resist our experience stresses us out. That through the activity of habitual clinging to stuff that we like, we want to hold on to stuff that we like, or pushing away something we don't want to experience, stresses us out. And that this, even on a subtle level, there's a sort of subtle dissatisfaction which rather than it being a problem to solve, oh, I have this problem of the way I relate to the world, it's an invitation into investigation of our own experience. So this is something we can explore for ourselves. We don't have to believe, to be a Buddhist, I have to believe this, but it's an invitation to explore this. And this is what the historical Buddha, explored. Why do human beings suffer? And the discovery was it's through this wanting to hold on to or wanting to push away our experience. The second part is the impermanence of things. That things are constantly changing. And that's actually one of the things that adds to our experience of stress, is that we actually know that that's true, right? Things change. It's like not a huge, big revelation, right? But the way that we relate to that is that we don't like that. We don't want the things that we like to change. We don't like the people we like to change. We don't like the situation because we know that things change, that is a point of anxiety. There's the part that things might change into something I don't want. Something might end. Actually, something will end. I think the stress of a human being is knowing fundamentally that we will die and that the people that we love will die. Sounds depressing, right? Right? So no, it's realistic. It's realistic. We know that things change. And so when we get out of the mode of habitual resistance to it, we can actually appreciate the preciousness of that. Another way to think about impermanence is flow. Things are constantly flowing. Things are constantly flowing, including us. We're constantly flowing. We can look at the quote-unquote downside of impermanence. This thing I like is going to change. I don't want that. I'm worried about how it will change. I know it will change. Oh, I can accept that it'll change, but I'd want it to change in this way that I want it to change. The other part of that is that we're not stuck. Because of the flow of things, one teacher, Guagu, says, for this impermanence teaching, he says, new beginnings. It's the teaching of new beginnings. Every moment is fresh. Every moment is a new beginning. Every moment we can choose to step forward into our life in a new way. So, stress, flowing, reality being flowing. The other thing that Buddhists, since you asked a Buddhist, what Buddhists are into is the exploration of of non-self. Non-self. Sometimes this is translated as no self, not so helpful. Kind of feel like I have a self. So on the face of it, it's kind of like, are you saying that I don't exist? Looking at it as non-self is an invitation to look at our direct experience that this life, it's an invitation to explore how this life, this experience is made of non-self elements. So for example, form. I have this body. So is there any less of Bansho when I cut my fingernails? Right? Or if I had a knee surgery and I got a ligament from a cadaver, is there less of me and then there's someone else in there? Right? It's So form isn't the self. We have emotions. We experience emotions. Those emotions change. So my experience, I have this feeling that I'm here, but yet on the other hand, what is happening here is constantly changing. Emotions are changing, feeling, good, bad, neutral, responses to my world. Our thoughts are constantly changing. If we think less, some of us, we were meditating, our thoughts kind of settled down. Was there less of you? Now, or what was your experience of you? So this is an invitation to explore what is this life? Who am I? So in this way, Buddhism is a path of discovery, and the elements of that exploration are meditation, which we all did, all of us, ethics, and wisdom, developing wisdom. And developing wisdom is becoming more and more aligned with the way things are, without our reactivity kind of covering up our experience. And in fact, one of the reasons why we meditate, my questions here, losing my props. Thank you. Is to experience the nature of our experience without being covered by thoughts. Experiencing frog song directly, experiencing rain directly without thinking about it. And then we can take that off the cushion and relate to our world without our thoughts and beliefs about people, situations, and experience the freshness of the moment. Then the last thing I'll bring up is the teaching of karma, cause and effect. Again, like impermanence, no duh, as we used to say in grade school. No duh, in the 80s. So cause and effect, and that from the personal standpoint, from our experience, this teaching, this invitation is that our actions, what we do, what we say, and what we think matter. They matter. They have an effect. And because things are things are infinitely complex, meaning there's many, many, many forces at play, that we do the best that we can, but we're not in control of the outcome a lot of the time. So we can take our best, in interpersonal, we can take our step forward and say something with kindness and expect a certain reaction, but we're not in control of that. We're not in control of other people's response, so we have to let it go. So karma, stress, flow, and what was the other one? Non-self. All right. How is meditation part of this? So the meditation part is that in Zen, the way that we explore these questions, these teachings, this inquiry is through meditation. And that by practicing, by being in the moment-by-moment experience of the body, breathing, for instance, that we can explore this for ourselves. One of the ways that we practiced in this particular retreat was relaxing on the out-breath. So we might try that right now. Just noticing your breathing. In-breath and out-breath. Long or short. The whole breath or just a little part of it. Just noticing your breath. In-breath and out-breath. And on the out-breath, relaxing. Each out-breath, noticing the body relaxing. So by doing this over and over again, coming back to the present moment experience of breathing or listening to sounds, eventually the mind settles down. The thinking mind settles down. A lot of people said that they experienced at the beginning, especially at the beginning of the retreat, that their thoughts were just kind of flowing like really, really intense, like a train. And that's really common when we first sit down. But by over and over again returning to the experience of the body breathing, those thoughts begin to settle down. We get more space. We attend to the present moment because of a lot of our thinking is about the future, anxiety, being caught in anxiety about the future, ruminating on the past, being intoxicated with our opinions. I'm right. They're wrong. Here's how I'll convince them about my opinion. Spending a lot of, these are the thought coverings of our experience. And so we're not practicing aversion to our thoughts. We're not saying thinking is bad. The thing that we're doing is we're over involved in our thinking life. Worries, ruminating, opinion justifying. And so what we're doing is we're reorienting our perspective to see more and more of our non-thinking life. The aspects of awareness. And then through this we can explore these teachings. We can explore about our experience. Who am I? What is this? Okay, another question. Oh, another question. What to do with the inner critic? One of the things that people experience when they meditate is subtle or sometimes really overt inner criticism. I'm not doing it right. I'm not getting this. I'm a bad meditator. And this is something that all, as far as I've experienced, I haven't met, maybe with few exceptions, someone who didn't experience an inner critic. And it's important to work, first to know that it's very common. The second part is that there's ways that we can work with the inner critic. And we have workshops here at the monastery about working with the inner critic, the inner critical voice that is constantly criticizing, or then is also being thoughts of outer judgment. There are many ways to work with the inner critic. Some of them are working on the level of thought. So you could try even just asking the inner critic to be quiet. Just say like, I'll talk to you later. We can rationally work with the inner critic. So, inner critic, how many beginner's mind retreats have you done? I think you've done just as many as I have. A lot of times it's unreasonable. A lot of times it's it has a sense of urgency, particularly around things we think are important, which is why it shows up in our spiritual practice, because this is important to us. One of the things that we can also explore is like, where does it come from? You know, oftentimes it's a very young part of ourselves that needs attention. So the inner critic is, and then finally the practice of loving kindness, which we did, metta meditation. The practice of loving kindness is a really potent way to work with the inner critic. And then there's the aspect, the non-self aspect, is really looking at who is the inner critic criticizing. Who is it? Who's even there? Is the inner critic me or not me? I kind of feel like it's outside of me, but yet it's in my mind. It's thoughts. What is that? Like, what is it even made of? And the more that we are able to have some stability of mind and be able to look at, disentangle and see the inner critic as thoughts and body sensations, it begins to get fuzzy. And through that, over and over again, it begins to lose its power. Next question, are you enlightened? No. Next question. What is enlightenment? Next question. So I knew this question would come up. What is enlightenment? So I asked ChatGPT. Just if you're interested, ChatGPT has a pretty good definition. Enlightenment in Buddhism is about awakening from the ignorance that clouds the mind, understanding the true nature of existence, and realizing liberation from the cycle of suffering and rebirth. It is the culmination of the Buddhist path, which involves cultivating wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. That's a pretty good answer. And it's, in a way, the opening up of those initial, what do Buddhists believe, the exploration, it's seeing through those, seeing the truth of those aspects. But I'm not enlightened, so I can't exactly say what it is, except that in Zen, we practice enlightenment. We practice awakening, not as a state, but as an unfolding. And that as we see, experience directly reality, the way things are, unmediated by our opinions and concepts, and experience the truth of our life, directly, we are awakening. What's with all the bowing? Bowing is a pretty foreign activity to us. We practice it here as a way to show appreciation, gratitude. We use it to put our whole body into what we're doing, what we're saying, communicate without words. Do I need a teacher? I would say yes. It's really helpful. So it's up to you. We're a pretty do-it-yourself DIY culture. We watch YouTube to figure out how to install an electrical switch. You can learn almost anything on YouTube. There are benefits to working with someone who has walked the path longer than us. And that's what the term sensei means, is like one who's walked ahead. Someone like Chosen and Hogan, they've practiced for decades and decades and decades. There's no state of mind that they haven't explored. So that's helpful. Without a teacher, without relationship in our spiritual practice, it becomes a self-referential activity. And for those of us who have a powerful inner critic, the inner critic starts to take charge. And it can really drain the enthusiasm of our practice. So it's really helpful to step out of that, sort of self-verification activity. So there are many teachers and teachings available, but there are benefits to having a flesh and blood teacher, to know and be known. So how do you find a teacher? These are some suggestions that from a Dharma talk Hogan gave many, many years ago that I had on CD. Remember those? And I listened to it over and over again. So a couple tips for finding a teacher, those of you who are enthusiastic. One is that it's helpful if they're nearby. Hard for Pema Chodron to be your teacher if she's in Colorado or Nova Scotia. We can definitely learn from her, but in terms of having a teacher that can really work with you, having them nearby helps. Helpful to know what is their training. Ask what their training is. Are they part of a lineage tradition? Can they tell you who their teacher is? Or have they just read a bunch of more books than you? What are their ethics? They have ethical code. We have like a 26-page ethical statement on ZCO's website, and that all of the teachers here abide by. We get ethics education. Does the teaching make sense? Does it make sense to your rational mind? We don't have to turn off our rational mind and just go blindly believe something. Like, it has to make sense. Is there rapport or relationship? Is there some kind of rapport? That matters. And relationships take time and regularity. So if you have a friend you see regularly, there's more intimacy than if there's somebody you see once a year. Not always, but if you can make it regular, it really helps. And as it takes time, and with regularity, you can get to be known and get to know the person that you're working with. And sometimes that's a little scary because we can't quite hide in the way that we did before. We can kind of hide on Zoom, or hide on in a podcast. We're like totally not known. And then for those people who are working with a teacher, who have been working with a teacher, look at, am I holding back? Are there places that I'm holding back? How can I step forward? Then the final thing is, what are the people like? So what is the practice with this teacher? What is it kind of produced from everyone else, from the people who practice with them? So those are some good indications. This was so great. How do I get my family to do this? How do I convince my family to take up meditation, start eating oryoki breakfasts? Yeah, don't do that. The best way the best expression is through your own life and being a good example, through your own practice. So take care of yourself, your own practice, and then it's up to them. I do my own personal example of this is that when I first started Buddhist practice, my mother had a lot of aversion to it. She was really afraid that there might be some sort of like, she didn't quite say like, is it the devil? But she was had some sort of really, was kind of worried about it. And so I just kind of kept practicing and practicing, and over the years, eventually she would ask me questions about meditation. Because I just kept doing it, and I think I was like, I think I would go home and I was like, over the years, like less and less reactive to her. And so it's like, this must be working. But by towards the end of her life, she was very, very an ardent practitioner of metta practice, of loving kindness practice, and she took that up and would listen to guided meditations. And that wasn't through any kind of proselytization or like, Mom, this is really great, you should do this. So be a good example. All right, I want to see, are there any questions? Any questions you want to ask a Buddhist? You got one right here. What have you always wanted to know? I don't see. Okay, Georgia. We'll get a mic over there.
Thank you. Is there a God in Buddhism?
Is there a God in Buddhism? Good question. No and yes. So, if you have a relationship with a higher power, God, that Buddhist practice is not at odds with that. Buddhism does not have a God as sort of a central figure. And through Buddhist practice, we can explore our relationship with God or ask the question, what is God, for ourselves? There are people who are ardent Christians and Buddhists. And there are a number of, there's a lineage within American Zen of people who are both Catholic priests and Zen teachers. And we've had for many years a Catholic nun practice with us in Portland. So it's definitely not mutually exclusive. And yeah. Does that answer your question?
Sort of.
Okay. Follow up.
So I have a particular relationship with the idea of God that's not necessarily attached to that. So I wonder about, like, is the Buddha a god? Or is there, who are the bodhisattvas? Are they metaphors or within Zen?
Okay. So I heard kind of actually two things there. One is that we can and do in Zen Buddhist practice explore the absolute, which some people would use the word God for the absolute, for wordless totality. In Zen, we don't worship the Buddha as a god. There are some Buddhist schools that relate to the Buddha as a divine being, or would say that ultimate reality or wordless totality is this Buddha, and names it this Buddha. Right? That there's a cosmic aspect to the Buddha. Mostly, the way that we tend to kind of day-to-day practice is the Buddha is a good example of what is possible in a human being. And so the bodhisattvas, there's a way to relate to bodhisattvas as to venerate them, to relate to them as a saint, as we might with a saint. The other aspect of that is that because there's nothing outside of the mind, that these are all aspects that can emerge from our practice. So Avalokiteshvara is the bodhisattva of compassion, and she is often presented as a woman, sometimes as a man, sometimes as neither. In Japan and China, Kannon, which we chanted Kanzei an Namu Butsu, it's in Japanese for Kannon. And she is the expression of universal compassion. And that through practice, we can embody that. So, veneration, inspiration, metaphor, not one thing. Yeah, many kind of doors into that. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Okay, thank you. Yes.
My question for a Buddhist is the Pali Canon. First of all, is that Pali canon or not Poly canon?
Yes.
And why isn't that like the Bible? Why isn't that the reference point for everything? And yeah, that's my question.
That's a good question. So the Pali Canon is the oldest teachings that we think are the oldest teachings that were from the time of the Buddha. And all the schools of Buddhism regard the Pali Canon as legitimate. In the Pali Canon are the stories of Shakyamuni Buddha, what he did, how he taught, who he taught. Very foundational teachings are in the what's called the Pali Canon. Canon, Canon. And in Mahayana Buddhism, there are these other writings, sutras, that actually get emphasized, which are like the Heart Sutra that we chanted. And so those are, there's a lot of historical murkiness about how these sutras arose, where they came from. And in the Pali Canon, what's emphasized is that the person meditates in order to liberate themselves, become an arhat. And in the later teachings, there's an emphasis on the bodhisattva vow, the bodhisattva ideal, which is the person who awakens with everyone. And so there are schools that just said, you know what, we want to emphasize this more. So it's not like the Pali Canon is wrong, but there's this other, that awakening is continually unfolding. Now the way that the early Mahayanists did it is they wrote the sutras and said, "Thus have I heard," which makes it sound like Ananda heard it, and that it's a way to kind of legitimize that at the time. But because awakening is constantly unfolding, that these teachings of awakening don't just live in the Pali Canon. So that's my best answer for this Buddhist today. Not
Thank
Buddha,
you.
Buddhist.
And
Yeah.
so to follow up there's is the Diamond Sutra that's past, that's not the original suttas.
That's a Mahayana.
So people just
Something.
make up, the Buddha said this, to make it legitimate.
Well, we don't know. So we don't know. We don't know exactly where they came from. The Pali Canon was passed along orally for a long time, and for hundreds of years. The Pali Canon was passed down for hundreds of years, and then was then eventually written down. So when were these other sutras? How were they passed along? Is there a single author or not a single author? Were they in deep meditation? And the way that this person related to what was arising is that this is the Buddha teaching me. The Buddha is saying this. This isn't Bansho. This is the Buddha coming to me. And so in a way that's a way that it's not like, where I'm going to try and fool people, but this is genuine revelation, new teaching. And the way it was taught is like the Buddha taught these things and then they got hidden away until the world was ready for them. And so one way that we might think about that is that eventually the teachings and the Sangha matured in such a way that it was able to be revealed to someone. But that's just conjecture, my conjecture. Yeah. I think that's it. Yeah. I'd be happy to answer more Buddhist questions during lunch. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Ask a Buddhist. That it wasn't too confusing, that you got some things that you could take home with you. Thank you all very much. Let's end with speaking of bodhisattvas, let's recite some bodhisattva vows.